Nancy Cordes in Chicago, live from the United Center. Welcome to a special Democratic National Convention edition of America Decides here on night one of the Democratic Convention. It has just gotten underway in earnest on the stage right now. Jamie Harrison, the chair of the Democratic Party. And in just a few hours, President Biden will take the stage here tonight. Speakers are paying tribute to the president all night long, weeks after he dropped his re-election bid. Democrats are rallying around the new nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, who secured the nomination earlier this month. 2016 Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton will also address the crowd tonight. Later in the week, we're going to hear from former President Barack Obama, former President Bill Clinton. Vice President Harris will accept her party's nomination on Thursday. Ed O'Keefe joins us from the floor of the convention now. Ed, you're right in the middle of all of it. Set the scene for us.
Nancy, good evening. Welcome to night one of the Democratic Convention. As you said, we're expecting to hear later tonight from President Biden, from First Lady Jill Biden. He will be introduced by his youngest daughter, Ashley Biden. Earlier in the evening, it's former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. Perhaps a cautionary tale to Democrats, because it was 8 years ago this summer. She was also in a pretty close race with Donald Trump. They came out of this convention with a head of steam. She ended up losing in November. But tonight, the beginning of a four-day quest to set Kamala Harris out on that general election campaign, better define her to voters. And Nancy, throughout the week, as you know, the delegates show up with a little flair. And in this case, I found someone that I think speaks to many of your interests. You are, after all, a Swiftie, right? Well, I found a Swiftie for you. What was your name again?
Kelly Jacobs.
Kelly Jacobs. And you're from where?
Mississippi.
What part of Mississippi?
Northern Mississippi, DeSoto County.
And look, you've got the bracelets and everything. What are the bracelets?
The bracelets say Kamala or Swiftie voter. I've been giving away 200 of them today. I brought 1,000 to give away for the convention.
Yeah.
I also am wearing these shoes. Did you notice?
Oh, I hadn't seen the shoes. Have you seen the shoes, Jared? KH for Kamala Harris,
That's
right? Have you been to these conventions before?
Yes, this is my 5th convention.
Your 5th convention?
Yes.
And talk to me about how this one compares to the last few, and maybe how the mood among fellow Democrats has changed in the last few weeks since President Biden.
Yeah, yes, so I'm the volunteer campaign manager for Diane Black for U.S. Congress in Northern Mississippi. She had no volunteers, no money, nothing when Biden was the top of the ticket. But with Kamala Harris stepping forward, oh my gosh, the excitement, the volunteers, everything has changed where I live in Northern Mississippi. We are so ready to get out the vote and to look forward with President Harris.
So it confirms that the change at the top of the ticket reinvigorated Democrats, even in ruby red Mississippi.
Absolutely, because they were not interested. Even my own husband said that President Biden is good, but he's frail. And he thought Trump would win. But now with Kamala Harris forward looking on the ballot, talking about women's issues, all the women who are the backbone of our party are going to show up and vote.
Got it. All right. Give us one more twirl. Taylor Swift, Kamala. You get the idea, Nancy. It's going to be that kind of a night, that kind of a week. And do you have other outfits for later in the week?
Yes. I'm going to have a Kamala dress every day.
Okay.
A different one.
We'll find you. Nancy?
Ed, I appreciate you finding a Swiftie in the crowd. You know who else are big Swifties is pretty much everyone in the Harris campaign, because they are really hoping that Taylor Swift comes out big for the vice president later on this fall. They hope that she will help to bring out the vote as well. We just heard a big cheer on the floor where you're standing because Maxine Waters, the congresswoman, longtime congresswoman of California, took the stage. Ed, my thanks to you. We'll talk to you again soon. We want to take you now, though, to the stage where Congresswoman Waters is speaking. Let's dip into that.
She told the people in the room about the violence she suffered at the hands of white police because she, a black woman, had demanded her right to vote. When she finished, she asked the country a simple but profound question. Is this America? She didn't get the outcome she was hoping for in Atlantic City, but you can bet that when the official Mississippi delegation was seated at the convention 4 years later, Fannie Lou Hamer was sitting there with them. Now here we are, 60 years later at another Democratic convention with Kamala Harris as our party's nominee. Oh, so I know there is no better leader to marshal us into the future. Kamala has been a courtroom prosecutor, a district attorney, an attorney general, a United States senator, vice president of the United States. And when the dust settles in November, and Americans of all stripes have elected her their president, I know she'll be thinking about Fannie Lou, who I happen to know is one of Kamala's heroes. In that moment, all of us, from New York to Pennsylvania to Arizona to California,
and you've been listening to Maxine Waters, the longtime Congresswoman from California, one of the first black female lawmakers here on Capitol Hill, to really blaze a trail that Kamala Harris is following today. As Democrats gather in Chicago, the Trump campaign kicked off the week with a focus on battleground states. Former President Donald Trump spoke earlier at a manufacturing facility in York, Pennsylvania. He plans to make stops in Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, all battleground states, later this week. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns has been on the trail with him, and she had an interview with the former president today. Caitlin, good to see you. You spoke exclusively with the former president today in Pennsylvania. What did he tell you about the race?
Well, Nancy, good to be with you. And as you very well know, Pennsylvania is the key state to watch this cycle. It's pretty much the center of the political universe because both campaigns say essentially they need to win here. So he started out here. J.D. Vance was also campaigning separately here in Pennsylvania today. But it's notable, Nancy, because the Trump campaign has said that they want to focus on the economy, immigration, and Kamala Harris's record, trying to tie Harris to the Biden administration in which she serves. But as we know, Donald Trump has veered off message quite frequently. He's attacked her appearance. He's attacked her intelligence. And so I've asked him, or earlier today, I asked him, why go down that road? How does that help you win votes? Take a listen to what he had to say. Why insult her intelligence?
Well, I have to do that. Well, I don't think she's a very bright person. I do feel that. I mean, I think that's right. I think I am a very bright person, and a lot of people say that. I don't think she's a very bright person. And you know what? Our country needs a very smart person, and I don't think she's a very smart person. So I'm not looking to, I don't consider that an insult. That's just a fact.
But what evidence do you have for that?
I looked at the things that she said. I looked at the way she deals. I looked at her record of her crazy record. I look at her policies. I just don't happen to think so. Now, I could say she is, and I know that would be very nice, and the other thing, we have to win this election. If we don't win this election, you're not going to be asking me or anybody else questions. You're not going to have a country anymore.
Do you think those personal attacks are necessary for you to win the election?
I hope they're not, but if I don't think somebody's good at something, if somebody's not good at something, I've always spoken my mind. I don't think she's very good at this. I think she'll destroy our country.
Lindsey Graham said that Trump, the showman, will not win this election.
Look, I like Lindsey. I don't care what he says, okay? Lindsey wouldn't have been elected if I didn't endorse him. So, South Carolina, Lindsey's my friend, but if I didn't endorse him, he would have had no chance of getting elected, and I can say that about a lot of other people, too.
So you disagree with him?
I think that I'm not a showman. I don't believe I am a showman. I think I'm somebody that has a lot of common sense, that did really well in business, made a lot of money. Everything I touched, whether I went into entertainment with The Apprentice or wrote books, I was successful at. Now I run for president, I win, and I did a real job. And now I'm watching the country go down the tubes, and we have to stop it. We can't lose this country, and that's what's going to happen.
And just quickly, the polls are tightening.
Yeah.
Do you need to change up, shake up your campaign?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I'm leading in most of the swing states, if not all.
Polls show a very
they
tight
did a
race.
very bad thing. They took a man who won, and they said, "Get out of here, Joe. This is a coup. And if you don't get out the nice way, we're going to get you out the bad way. Get out of here, Joe." It was a terrible thing they did. And then they put him on Monday night. You know what that's called? That's called like the worst night, okay? And after that, you won't see him too much anymore. What they did is incredible. This was a coup. This was a coup of the President of the United States. I think it was a terrible thing. I'm not a fan of his, but I think the way they did this was a terrible thing.
But he's still the president. He's just not the nominee.
Excuse me. The way they did this were terrible. They had no votes. She assumed the presidency with no votes, not one single vote. He had 14. What?
But she's not president. She assumed the nomination.
No, she took over the nomination. She got the nomination to run for president with not a vote being cast. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. I think it's terrible. Now, again, I think he was a horrible president. I think she was an equally bad vice president. She gave us the inflation. She did the worst job of anybody in history on the border. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called that, but she was the border czar. But at a minimum, she was in charge of the border. Millions of people have come into our country from prisons, from mental institutions, traitors and terrorists and everything. They're pouring into our country. Look, she's been horrible at what she did. She was in charge of the worst border in the history of the world. Millions and millions of people have come in here from jails and prisons and from mental institutions, and it's unbelievable what she's done. If she's going to be president, our country will fail and fail badly and fail quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. So you see there a range of criticisms of Kamala Harris from the former president. But you could also see, Nancy, that, he still brings up President Biden. And this is a campaign that was built around facing Biden in this election. And until he was no longer in the race, that changed the dynamics of this race. As our own polling shows, the race is very competitive, especially in these battleground states.
Yeah, and I think what you really captured is how defiant the former president is, how determined he is to continue to lob personal attacks about the vice president's intelligence, no matter how many Republicans urge him to change course. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much. Great interview. Thousands of protesters are expected to rally outside of the Democratic National Convention over the next 4 days. We're going to check in next with our Lilia Luciano to find out more about the message protesters are trying to send. You're streaming America Decides. We'll be right back.
America's more like a quilt, many patches.
Welcome back to America Decides. We are coming to you from Democratic National Convention headquarters at the United Center in Chicago. And there's a remarkable moment playing out behind me on stage right now. There you see the famed civil rights leader, Jesse Jackson Sr., being led off the stage. He got a huge round of applause, obviously from Chicago, so this is his hometown. He is 82 years old. He has an advanced case of Parkinson's, which is why he is in a wheelchair. But there has been a big focus on his role organizing, which paved the path for everything that we are seeing here today. We're going to continue to dip in and out of the program throughout the night as big speakers emerge. Protests near this venue are planned throughout the week, calling for an end of U.S. aid to Israel and its war with Hamas. Most of the protests have been peaceful, but there was a flare-up late this afternoon, so I want to bring in Lilia Luciano to tell us more about that. Lilia, what can you tell us about this incident where it seems like a small group of protesters maybe broke off from the main group and charged through a fence?
Well, Nancy, last time you and I spoke live, it was actually starting to happen. The march had gone on just as planned, very peacefully, and people got to this park, which is just about a couple of blocks away from where the arena is. By the time we got here, two of these squares that you see behind me, or three or four actually, between 2 and 4, had been taken down by protesters. What we heard is that people took them down using sledgehammers. I wasn't here, so I can't confirm that that's what was used, but they were off. They were pushed in, and then protesters started going into where you see behind me, beyond the fence where police are. There were several dozen protesters there. We were able to see as they manifested, they chanted, they continued their chants for the end of the war in Gaza. And then there was a small group of officers on this side who were kind of standing by, waiting for backup and telling protesters to move, but no confrontation. And then a couple dozen other officers in riot gear then showed up with their face shields, with batons, and they were able to push, including the police superintendent, a group of them were able to push all of the protesters, all of the media outside of that, through the fence. And then as more protesters gathered in this park, then we saw a mass showing of police in riot gear. They lined up all along the park. The whole park was surrounded by them, and they started moving people, telling people to move away, move away, move away, until they cleared the entire park. There was no tear gas, there was no violence. There was only one protester that I saw that went over the fence and was kind of dangling there over the fence once police took everybody out, and police didn't take him out of there. And then things remained peaceful. All the protesters have left the park, and now we're just seeing people in their bikes coming around, but the protest has essentially ended.
Got it. Lilia Luciano outside of this convention, keeping an eye on the protests. Thanks so much. And now I'm joined by CBS News political contributor Ashley Etienne. She is also the former communications director for Vice President Harris, so she has a unique perspective. And Ashley, tell me your impressions of this night one of the convention and what you've heard so far.
Well, I can tell you that the energy is incredibly electric, not just within the building, but outside the building. Everyone I've run into, from elected officials from across the country to delegates to people who are just travel into town with no other objective other than to just be in this sphere, in this space. Everyone is incredibly excited about the possibilities of Kamala Harris's candidacy, excited about where the party is right now, and the enthusiasm, the momentum behind her. So it's incredibly electric, and everyone's very excited, so I'm excited about it.
And when I saw you first this evening, you were remarking on the fact that there has been a focus, at least in night one, what we've seen so far, on Black women. Was that a conscious choice? Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I've been hearing the rumblings and the murmurs inside the party for some time now that there was going to be a huge focus on Black women. This is sort of a full circle moment for Black women. You know, there was an opening moment where they focused on Fannie Lou Hamer, who argued for Black participation within the Democratic Party, asking, are we the Democratic Party? Meaning, why aren't we more inclusive? Why aren't you including Black people? There was a focus on Dorothy Height, Shirley Chisholm, who's the first woman to actually run for the presidency. So the point that's been made tonight is that this is a full circle moment. Black women were the first to argue that Biden should put a woman on the ticket and then lean in, suggesting and insisting to some degree that it should be Kamala Harris. They were also the first to organize when there were questions about whether or not Joe Biden could continue and actually continue in the presidency and run for president. They were the first to start organizing around Kamala Harris, and they were the first to hold a call with 40,000 women from across the country. And they kicked off all of these other calls that started to happen and created the momentum behind Kamala Harris. So they've been the wind at her back at this entire moment. So there's been a focus on acknowledging the work of Black women to really make the party rise to its full ideals.
And, you know, Black women are such an important base in this party that President Biden made a promise that he would nominate a Black woman as vice president.
Yeah, and it's because of that insistence. I mean, I think over the past 10 or so years, Black women have been sort of recognizing and their own power in this party, and acknowledging that we are the very core in the essence of this party. We deserve not just a vice president, but a Supreme Court justice and all of these other positions, because now it's our time. We've been the backbone of this party long enough. The party now owes us to give us a seat at the table. And that's what they've been demanding. And this is the full circle moment where Kamala Harris is going to be at the head of that table.
First black female nominee. Now, I want to ask you about something. I talked to Cedric Richmond earlier tonight. He worked in the White House with the vice president, as you did. And he said that because she is the first black female vice president, the first female vice president, that they did struggle to try to figure out how to position her, how to sell her. Was that something that you witnessed firsthand?
Absolutely. You know, I've worked for the two most powerful women in American politics, Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris. I've been fortunate enough to do that. And when you work for a woman leader, the first order of business is positioning them. To not just for them to understand and realize their own power, but that power has to be expressed. And how you express that power has to be very intentional. And that's from, you know, big things like posture, words they use, the angles at which, you know, photos are shot, how, you know, all these layers.
Policy assignments.
Policy assignments. Assignments that actually are achievable, right? Not getting bad assignments. All of those things, positioning them substantively, you know, all of those things are important. So I think Cedric Richmond's absolutely right. I think the benefit that she's been able to have is this incredible record from being the first Attorney General, U.S. Senate. She's the most prepared person to go into that office. So I do agree with him, but there's probably very little positioning at this point that she needs to actually do. But when we were with her the first year, that was a really major focus, is how do we demonstrate and convey to the world that the woman could be in that particular position, and it could be Kamala Harris, and she could have the top job.
When so there's no script, there's no playbook.
No, absolutely not. No, but there's do's and don'ts, obviously. I mean, there's been a lot of, you know, Hillary Clinton tried it, obviously, so there's lessons learned from her. But when you do this job in terms of communications, you take from all these powerful women, Michelle Obama to Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and then you incorporate that into the lessons learned for Kamala Harris.
Ashley Etienne, fascinating perspective. Thank you so much. We'll be talking again. Appreciate it. Chicago itself has a storied history in Democratic politics. We're going to have more on that connection next. You're streaming America Decides.
Co-Chair Romero to present the national platform as recommended for approval by the committee. Our platform is grounded in our democratic values of hope, of progress, and love of our country. It makes a strong statement about the historic work that President Biden and Vice President Harris have accomplished.
Welcome back to America Decides. You're joining us from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago on night one, the first time that the Windy City has hosted this convention since 1996. Our Adriana Diaz is down closer to the floor. She joins me now. Adriana, you have covered Chicago for years. Tell us about the significance of Chicago hosting the convention this year. Illinois obviously is not a battleground state, but it's close to some big ones.
It is not, but Democrats here hope that Illinois will be part of the blue wall they believe is needed to win this election. That is Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, so it is sandwiched between some battleground states here that really are in play. But there is, as you said, a storied history of Chicago. It's actually the city that has hosted the most conventions in history. This is number 26. As you said, 1996 was the last DNC here. That's when people were doing the Macarena here in the stands, if you might remember, Nancy. These are different times now, but there is a strategic significance to Chicago. On the practical side, they have the hotels and the restaurants to support all of these visitors. But on the symbolic side, this is really the middle of the country. This is middle America. The voters that Kamala Harris wants to reach, that both candidates really want to reach, it is geographically centered, but also, although Chicago is so blue, a lot of the surrounding areas and states are red. When I was based here for almost 10 years, I spoke just as often to people on the south side of Chicago as I did to farmers in rural areas around this city and around this state. So there really is kind of that slice of America that you can get right here in the Midwest.
Right, and crucially, you've got Michigan, Wisconsin, not far away, and those are two key battleground states in the Midwest. Adriana Diaz, thanks so much for that insight and perspective. Still to come, our political panel weighs in on the importance of this convention to Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential bid. You're streaming America Decides on night one of the Democratic Convention. We'll be right back.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a second. We will now have a voice vote on the motion to ceremonially confirm our vice presidential nominee. All in favor of the motion, please proudly say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. I'm thrilled to proudly reaffirm Tim Walz as our Democratic nominee for vice president.
Welcome back to Chicago, where we are live from the Democratic Convention and anticipating President Biden's address to the convention this evening. They're doing some housekeeping right now, adopting the platform and congratulating the nominee, Kamala Harris, and her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz. Let's bring in our political panel now, Chuck Rocha and Matt Gorman. Chuck is a Democratic strategist who was a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. And Matt is a Republican strategist who served as a senior advisor to Senator Tim Scott's presidential campaign. Welcome to both of you. Chuck, you are here at the convention, so I'll start with you. Tell me your perception so far on how the convention is shaping up on night one and what you expect to hear from President Biden tonight.
Well, it's a nice reminder to be back in Chicago. I was here as the youngest delegate from the state of Texas in 1996, and I remember this very Coliseum and the energy in the room that night. I think that's what struck me from walking in. It was like an old reunion. I get to see all the old Democratic friends of mine, but I think that's what's really changed in this campaign in the last 30 days is the energy. We were flat on our face 30 days ago. My Democratic friends were worried to death. But today, there's like an injection of energy, and you feel it in this room. You feel it as soon as you walk in. You feel it in focus groups that I'm currently doing. And I think that's the real difference. And tonight, what I'm looking for is to make a real message from the Democrats to the American people of what we're going to do to make their lives better and what distinguishes us between us and the Republicans.
Chuck, I'm glad that this is a full circle moment for you. Matt, I want to ask you about the energy at this convention, because obviously there was a ton of energy at the Republican convention. What you didn't see at the Republican convention is something that you're seeing here, which is for current and former presidents, first ladies, being willing to come up and speak on behalf of the nominee. How much should we read into what that says about the position that nominee, Donald Trump, finds himself in right now?
Not much. Look, a Republican president, a past Republican president or current, hasn't been to the convention since 2008 when George W. Bush did a video address into St. Paul for John McCain. So, look, that's just a fact of life for Republicans right now. And look, I think Chuck's right to an extent, right? Joe Biden was acting as essentially a metaphorical dam on Democratic money and enthusiasm. But when he left the race, it's flowed through. And we're essentially back to where we were in many respects, or expected the race to be in June 26th before that debate. And so I think right now we're going to see it's going to be a tight race either way. But now it's much more of a jump ball than it was, as Chuck points out, a month ago.
Matt, I don't know how much of Caitlin Huey-Burns' interview of the former president you were able to see, but basically she asked him about the frustration on the part of a lot of leading Republicans about his personal attacks on Kamala Harris, her appearance, her intelligence, and he basically said he's not going to change and he doesn't care what they have to say. I would imagine that doesn't surprise you at all at this point.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the man's 78 years old. He's going to do what he's going to do, for better or worse. But look, what I'll say is this. the best attack against Kamala Harris isn't purely policy. It's not purely personal either. It's that she's someone without a core political set of principles. She's a chameleon, as J.D. Vance has put it. And talking about that, I think, is probably the most effective. As we saw, the first thing she puts her name on after walking back a host of positions from 2020 is an economic plan that's been pilloried by not just Republicans, but the Washington Post and Jason Furman, who's a former Obama aide. So I think that's telling in and of itself. So follow that path, and we'll see where things go.
Chuck, our CBS News poll over the weekend found that more than a third of Americans still don't really know much about Kamala Harris, her positions, her platform, which means that not only is this convention crucial for defining her, but it's also a huge opportunity for Democrats if they get it right. What can they do to get it right? And what should Harris herself do on Thursday to make sure that at the end of this week, American voters feel like they know who she is and what she stands for?
The Democrats should have a convention 60 days before folks start getting ballots like we're doing right now. This is the most perfect timing in the world. Is that on Saturday, the campaign announced that they're going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars to tell their story to the American people. This week, every press outlet from all over the world is here covering our convention. This is when you make the case because, as Matt knows and I know, we've run lots of campaigns, people start really tuning in right around Labor Day. And that's where we are right now. That's why this sets up so good for Kamala Harris. Matt was right, and I would agree with him, that this was 70-30 Trump till a month ago. Now it's back to 50-50. We're in the game. And is it inching more our way every day with the current polling? Sure it is. But it's going to be a tough battle till the end. But we get to introduce ourselves now to the American people with a new slate of folks who have a proven track record. And I think that's what this week is going to be so pivotal for our party.
No question, with the vice presidential nominee Tim Walz speaking on Wednesday, and then Vice President Harris herself, the nominee, on Thursday. Chuck Rocha and Matt Gorman, thanks so much for joining me. We'll be speaking again soon, I know. Well, we're now just hours away from the President of the United States speaking at this convention, which, as of just 1 month ago, don't forget, was set to recognize him as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. And I want to talk about that with my next guest. Democratic Congresswoman, House Minority Whip, Katherine Clark, is here to talk about these changes, and it really is a completely transformed race. I know that you were among those who stood by President Biden right until the end when he announced that he was going to be stepping aside. And so I'm wondering what this past month has been like for you and what this night has been like, knowing that it's kind of a passing of the baton moment.
I am so looking forward to tonight and hearing from our president, who's been a transformative president and has made this incredible patriotic decision to pass the torch to his vice president, Kamala Harris. And tonight we're going to hear from him, not only honoring him, but his vision for the future with President Harris.
And speaking of President Harris, you know, out on the campaign trail, former President Trump has been arguing that somehow this was a coup, that this nomination was stolen by Kamala Harris and other Democratic leaders from its rightful owner, President Biden. I want to play you some of that sound and then ask you about it. Let's take a listen.
I wonder if they knew that when they did an overthrow or a coup on Joe Biden. I wonder if they knew where she comes from, where she came from, what her ideology is.
So how do you respond to people like the former president who say that this was somehow undemocratic? Because after all the delegates here in this arena, they cast their votes for President Biden, not for Vice President Harris.
You know, Donald Trump can't even imagine this scenario. There is nothing he has done in his life as president, as running for president again, that is anything about anyone but him. That is his whole purpose, is how does he gain power? How does he gain control? And so the idea of President Biden responding to a nation and saying, I'm not the best person at this time. I am going to pass the torch to the next generation. He can't even fathom that. That is so out of anything that he can imagine. And now he finds himself with a complete energy change. And with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz just having momentum moving forward as they travel across this country talking to voters about how they're going to lower their costs, grow the middle class, and protect our fundamental freedoms. Everything that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are against. And so he's totally perplexed and flailing around at this moment to try and understand the situation he's in, because that's his worldview. His worldview stops at his own fence post, and he just can't imagine the situation he's in, where Kamala Harris is connecting on a different level, and he's seeing the American people reject him and his extremism.
And yet, back in 2016, he said over and over again something was wrong with Hillary Clinton. She's ill. She's, got some terrible disease. And there were voters who eventually started to believe that. Is there a possibility in this race that if he keeps saying Kamala Harris is dumb, Kamala Harris is crazy, she's a Marxist, if he keeps on, painting her in this way, that eventually some of it's going to stick?
I'm sure with some of his base followers, maybe they believe him. But I think people understand what's happening here. And it is very hard when you look at Kamala Harris, when you hear her plans for making sure that we bring reproductive freedom back to this country, that we reject the extremism that they're offering, that she sees the American people and she says to them, I don't want you to just get by, I want you to get ahead. And here are the solutions, whether it's about price gouging, whether it's about helping children and families afford childcare, whether it's about protecting our environment, whether it's about reforming our immigration system. She's coming to the table with a vision about an economy where everyone can see themselves. And she is coming to the table with a vision of the future. And people are sick of the divisiveness, of the name calling, of the bullying. They want to see themselves reflected in a presidential campaign, and they are finding that in Kamala Harris.
Let's talk about some of those proposals, because she's suggesting a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. She's talking about a $6,000 child tax credit for newborns. Some really generous proposals, pretty progressive, which is surprising coming at this moment in the campaign when typically candidates tend to move towards the center rather than going more to the edges of their party. Why do you think she is taking that approach?
I think you've seen this from the last 4 years as vice president. She believes in investing in the American people. She wants the winner circle in this country to grow and not just be for the already very wealthy, the already very connected. So she's saying to wealthy Americans, she's saying to corporations, pay your fair share. And let's make sure we're building a robust economy where everybody can see a future for themselves and for their children. And the American people understand it. They get that the system is often rigged against them, and they're rejecting that kind of extremism and the picture that Donald Trump is painting. And let's look at what he's proposing. Last week, he upped the ante and said 20% tariffs, which translates to $3,000 more in costs on goods for the average American family. That doesn't make sense for our country, for the economy. It certainly doesn't make sense for voters.
House Minority Whip Catherine Clark, thanks so much for joining me this evening.
Nancy.
Enjoy the convention.
Thank you, I will.
Absolutely, you're welcome. Well, stay with us because we're going to have more analysis from day one of the 2024 Democratic National Convention as we await President Biden's speech. You're streaming America Decides. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of night one of the Democratic National Convention. I want to bring in now CBS News political director Fin Gomez. Fin, so good to see you. You're the perfect person to talk to because you were at the Republican convention 1 month ago when this was a very different race.
Yes.
When, they basically put on their entire convention thinking that they were going to be running against Joe Biden.
Right.
Talk about the similarities, differences you see so far, and it's early in night one. We are not like really in the swing of things yet. But the similarities and differences between this convention and the Republican convention in terms of who's been asked to speak, who's attending, the energy, all of it.
I mean, I think just, strangely enough, Nancy, I think that so much has happened since in the last couple of weeks, obviously since the RNC in Milwaukee, but there has been one major similarity that I have found is that during that convention, you saw like this sense of unity, collective unity across, they did feel that they felt very good and confident, cocky about where they were in terms of the race. And now, because the script has essentially been flipped, now you're seeing, and they're also contrasting themselves with the disarray at the time with the Democrats. But now, here, a couple weeks later, in Chicago, you're finding the unity and that sense of unity here, right, amongst the Democrats with this momentum they now see and feel are surrounding Kamala Harris. Whereas in contrast to the Republicans and Donald Trump right now, there's this sense of there's this sense of bad headlines and things aren't going so great on their side, right? So I think in just a couple weeks, and it just shows sort of the mercurial nature and uniqueness of this cycle,
right?
That things can change like that.
But there's a surprise in every cycle, right? I mean, the only thing that's constant in elections is there is no constant. And tonight, we're not just going to be hearing from President Biden, and there'll be a huge outpouring of emotion when he speaks, but also former Secretary of State, former Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. And we all remember 8 years ago when she walked out in that white pantsuit onto that stage and talked about what a revolutionary thing it would be if she were to be elected the first female president. And it didn't happen. And tonight, even though Kamala Harris doesn't talk a lot about being the first, really talk at all about being the first, Hillary Clinton, we're told, is going to touch on that and what a history-making moment it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw, we were both there in Philadelphia for that convention and also at the Javits Center and on election night as well. And in speaking to delegates here and also some advisors to Hillary Clinton in 2016, there's a sense that there's this continuation of her legacy that they felt was arrested or stopped because of the outcome in 2016. And now they're looking at this potential for history, for electing the first woman president that I think is palpable here. You really hear a lot of chatter in the hallways and delegates talking about that as well. The historic nature of what could happen in 78 days from now.
And, even though the vice president is not here, and technically she's not speaking until Thursday night, I have the feeling that we're going to see her, we're going to see her vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, at key moments throughout this convention in some way.
Yeah, and I think you got a little taste of that earlier today when Walz dropped in on this Pennsylvania breakfast delegation when he wasn't expected. The sense of of surprise and these reveals, but also I think they sense the energy of the crowd, and it's also it's a little bit of reward, connecting them, and also continuing that momentum that they feel so strongly, not only here in Chicago but throughout the country.
Right, and they're hoping they can capture that momentum and take it through the next 80 or so days. Fin Gomez, thanks so much. Appreciate your insight. Well, that's going to do it for me for now. CBS News special coverage will continue all evening long, and I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. Thanks for joining me. You're streaming America Decides. See you tomorrow.